Hey everyone, welcome back. This is Recording Drums with Simple Effective Techniques, episode 2. Today we're looking at everybody's favourite, the snare drum. So let's dive right in. Now, there are a lot of things a snare drum needs to do in our mix, and there's also a whole load of different snare sounds out there. And while it's true that we should tailor our approach to every song we're recording and every drum that we have in front of us, there are some techniques which do just seem to translate across all of them. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, you probably know that there's one mic that is like the ubiquitous snare drum mic, right? And that is this, a Shure SM57. They've been around forever. These things, relatively for audio gear, are cheap as chips. And I remember thinking when I started out my career, like, really? Is that the best we can do? Like, I was working in studios that had mic lockers with hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of mics in them. And I thought there must be something else, right? There must be something rarer or older or more interesting or more expensive that'll do the job better. And while there are mics which will make really, really interesting snare sounds, I really have come back around to thinking that these 80-90% of the time will do a really, really good job for you. The key is just learning how to use them and maybe some of the principles about why these work so well, more so than other mics. Because these aren't flat sounding mics at all. Like if you have a listen to them and have a look at the frequency plot, which we can pull up just now, they have this huge bump in the high mids. Even, to be honest, in the rest of the highs. They have a bit of a cut in the low mids as well. And what that makes them sound, well, let's plug it up. It makes it sound a little bit like this. So here is me using an SM57 like quite close to my mouth, which is actually not a bad sound, right? There's a load of great presence from that high mid hump. Like a lot of the mud in my voice has kind of been scooped out, and it just tightens things up a little bit. It's a really useful thing to have on sounds that you're going to want to pop to the front of your mix. Any sounds that might be a bit muffled, it's going to just tighten them up. But it also has, it's probably a bit hard to hear in my voice, I always think an SM57 gives a really, really like aggressive quality to things. It's like you've taken your sound to the gym and it's just ready for a fight. It's had a couple lagers and it just wants the smallest issues to kick off. All of which is really, really useful for if you want a sound to be prominent in your mix, which we usually want snare drums to be. So, how do we go about using our simple, trusty SM57 to capture a great sound? And what should it sound like in isolation? Let's check it out. Okay, we've got that same thing happening as with kick-ins, right? Like the mic on its own really doesn't sound like the mic did in the overheads. But even though that was something I really tried to chase at the start of my career, I came to realize that a lot of that time, that just leaves you with a bit of a lackluster sound, really. It leaves you kind of with some goodness on the table. Check out how that sounds in the context of the whole drum mix. Yeah, so there we go. I mean, even though there's plenty of snare in the overheads anyway, it just has loads more definition by the time you bring that mic in. There's loads more detail. The tone feels a little bit fuller, which is really cool. It just makes sense. That's the sound we're used to hearing on records. And let's look at how we actually position the mic to get that. When we're positioning a snare drum mic, there's a couple main things to take into account, and that's like kind of where the mic is relative to the drum and how it's angled relative to the drum. We can angle down for more overtones, we can angle more at the stick for more attack. But also if you lower your mic a little bit, you're going to find you get more overtones. And if you raise it up, you'll find that you get more stick attack and actually a bit more kind of like low end punch. For me, the sweet spot is to have the mic about like the capsule just about level with the rim of the drum, about 2.5 inches off the drum, and pointing just about where the stick hits. I've just always found that that's like a happy medium kind of does the job. And for me, I can find that out quite easily by just putting 3 fingers on the skin of the drum, resting the mic on top. For me, that's about the right height. The best rejection on a 57 is behind, being cardioid. So if you're finding you're getting a lot of hi-hat in that mic, Like that's quite a common thing. You might try and just angle it actually so the back of it is more towards the hi-hat. That's going to reject better. In terms of EQ, it's a bit like with the kick drum, right? We want to exaggerate what's already great about the sound and minimize anything which we aren't really sure is that important in the mix. So low end heft is really important. Someone once said to me that a kick drum should hit you right down in the guts and a snare drum should hit you in the solar plexus. The frequency for that is somewhere around 200 hertz. That is around where the fundamental, like the lowest natural resonant frequency of a snare drum is going to be. So boost that, and that'll give you a lot more kind of heft, something a bit like this. And the other thing that's super common to do is boost like the highs, like kind of 5K and above in a shelf. It just gives a bit more of like a modern sound. So, I mean, it really is as simple as that for snare top mics, for 80% of the things you're recording. But while that feels great on its own, that doesn't always sound like the drum really did in the room. I find myself wondering if there's some kind of Goldilocks zone. We've got like the qualities we want for a snare drum here, but we maybe could just have a bit more of the truth of how that drum actually sounded in the room. And it won't surprise you at all to hear, I think miking up a snare bottom is kind of the way to go. Now, there are a load of engineers out there whose opinions I really, really trust, who hate the sound of a snare bottom mic. And I think in its kind of vanilla form, doing the thing that most people seem to want to do with a snare bottom mic, I actually really agree. Because the one thing I do not want from a snare bottom mic is snare wires sound. So actually, I'll do as much as I can with positioning to minimize how much of the snare wires I'm going to be picking up. Like if you were sitting below the drum looking up at it, and the snare wires are running top to bottom here, I'm miking up as far away as I can get, not along them to try and pick up as much as I can. I'm trying to pick up as little as I can. The bottom head is being moved rather than like hit. So you'll find there's a lot less transient and a lot more sustained information there. But also, there's a lot more just like harmonic complexity. There's loads more overtones and kind of interesting stuff there. That's really what I want to try and capture when I'm miking one up. When I'm positioning this, I'm trying to make it the mirror image of the snare top. So whatever angle, whatever position this snare top mic is in, I'm doing the mirror opposite. Because the one thing you have to think about all the time when you've got more than one mic on the same source is phase coherence. Like, are these two mics picking up very different signals, and therefore when I try and add them together, are there going to be parts which cancel out, actually, which I don't want? Is it going to be constructive addition, or is it going to be kind of destructive? In my head, it seems to make sense that the closer you can match the two positions of those mics, the more constructive the summing will be, and therefore like the harder, the more like focused the combined sound is going to be. So check out what a snare bottom sounds like on its own. So you can really hear the difference in like the transient information between those two, right? The snare top is almost all about transient. The snare bottom, there's barely any at all, really. The best bit, though, is when they're both together, and even better than that is how they fit into the whole context of a drum mix. Yeah, I mean, to me, that solves all the outstanding questions I had by just using one SM57 on snare top. There feels like there's more air there. There feels like there's a lot more dynamic detail there. Did you notice how much more the ghost notes come through when you're using the snare bottom as well? It feels to me like the fundamental frequency is just a bit more clear, and it just kind of sounds like a more true and honest picture of how that snare actually sounded. So there we go. That's a bit of a crash course in miking up snares and how to think about them. Next time, we're going to be talking about, I think, my favourite mic, actually, on the drum kit, which is the overheads. So stay tuned for that video coming up soon. And in the meantime, have a great session, and I'll catch you on the next one.